Good morning. Welcome. Good morning, everybody. Glad that you're here, joining in person and online. I just want to say this before we even get started, that next week, the big kahuna, the boss man, a.k.a. Ronnie McBrayer, will be back. So it's been a joy. It's been a pleasure of helping lead. And, over the past few months, we've had a phenomenal group of musicians come and help us. These guys have been here week in, week out. I'm super grateful for some of our guest speakers that we've had. And today, Anna will be closing out this time of Ronnie's break. So I'm really looking forward to hearing her speaking. It's going to be a fantastic time. So once again, welcome. Glad you guys are here. Will you please stand and join with us as we sing these next two songs?
Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever will be. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Summer and winter, springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above, join with all nature in manifold witness to thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth. Thy own dear presence to cheer and to guide. Strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine and 10,000 beside.
Let's hear ya.
Great is Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship his holy name. Sing like never before. Oh my soul, I worship your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship his holy name. Lord of my soul. Oh, my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before. I'll worship Your holy name. Bless the Lord of my soul. Oh, my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before. I worship Your holy name. I worship Your holy name. I worship Your holy name.
You may be seated.
So, welcome this morning. Lovely to see you all, and it's nice to be back up here again. So, as the last speaker in this 4-month period of Ronnie not being around, this is before Ronnie's return, or Ronnie's revenge, or Ronnie strikes back, or whatever other Ronnie thing we could say. It's my privilege to speak to you this morning. And I just wanted to express our thanks to Garrett. He's done a great job. I know it hasn't been easy. I appreciate all you've done, Garrett and Erin, for coping with it all. I'm not really known to be soppy or emotional, if you know me very well. But in our early married days, we went to Greece, one of our favourite places, and Doug really wanted to scuba dive. I wasn't keen on that. I don't like going underwater. But I was newly married, and it's like, what do you do? So did it. But after we came up from the dive, we were with a group of other people, and as we got back to the beach, everybody kept coming up and saying, oh, it's lovely how much you love each other, and oh, what a lovely married couple, you can't stop holding hands even underwater. What they didn't know is that I was holding his hand for dear life, kind of in the middle of a panic attack, thinking I was going to drown, couldn't breathe, and I was scared witless, and trying to be very brave, and just holding on to Doug, fearing that I'd drown. Well, I didn't, obviously. But the last 18 months that we've been through, I think it's been feeling a bit like that, feeling that we were underwater, with a lot of emotions twirling around, not knowing what would happen to us or our loved ones. And it's a bit like we were holding our breath, maybe still are, scared, while on the surface it looked like we were just holding it together. And each of us will have had very different experiences, often dependent on where we live. And I know I've got some friends in England listening, and it's very different there, even right now. But it's touched us all. So although the pandemic isn't over with new variants and new shutdowns all over the world, I wanted to take this moment in time at the end of the series of guest speakers and, you know, as we kind of wrap up certain periods in our lives, I wanted to take this time to look back at our experience, as I don't want to move on to business as usual or normal, whatever that might be, before we've mined any gifts that this time can give us. You may have said over the last year that this experience is going to change my life. You were going to travel, you were going to spend more time doing what you loved, with people you loved. It may have even have been a commitment to yourself to make sure you got plenty of loo rolls and you weren't going to run out. Do you remember that? But whether it's heavy or light, let's remind ourselves today of some things that we felt and experienced. And then I want to anchor the story in John's Gospel and a story about how Jesus and some of his friends dealt with a pretty traumatic event. And we'll find an invitation for us as to how we can move forward to the next phase of our life as a people and a church community. And it may remind us of some of the things that we said to ourselves about how we were going to live life. So what did we feel, or maybe we even still feel? It's certainly been a roller coaster of feelings. On March the 16th, a Monday at 11 o'clock in the year 2000, I was at Black Bear with Ronnie, Doug, and Hilary, who runs the local free health clinic. And we were talking about making posters about how we need to wear cloth masks and sanitize our hands. But by the end of that week, Friday, we were involved with importing KN95 medical grade masks from China. Things had suddenly kind of accelerated with some of the money that you gave. And those masks were going to be for emergency services around here that had none, and the clinic and others. I wonder where you were, what you were thinking, what you were feeling. You might like to think on that. I certainly had feelings of uncertainty, confusion, anxiety. There was a lot of fear about leaving your house. And then people felt very isolated, particularly thinking of New York and my daughter and loads of people in small apartments. And those pictures we had of Italy with people singing from their little individual windows because they were on their own. People felt very lonely, and it's been a rise in depression. There's evidently 42% of Americans say that they are depressed and fit that criteria in a recent CDC study. I also remember feeling very angry, lots of things. When the same daughter ended up isolating with us because she came down that very Monday for a week's vacation and stayed 3 months. She continued running a small charity, which I helped with. And I remember talking on the phone to a lady in New York, a mother, who was desperate for practical help. She was worried about how she'd pay for food. The fridge was empty. She had 5 children to feed in a 2-bedroom apartment. As a waitress, she lost her job when the restaurants closed. The children were doing school at home, but they had no laptop, no iPad, and no Wi-Fi. And I was angry at the inequality and the poverty gap. And yes, she was living in the projects, the public housing, tall buildings, bang in the middle of the wealthiest borough in New York. And yes, she was African American, and we remember all those issues too. In fact, good news, Lexi was able to link her to a charity that was giving out iPads. Some amazing stuff happened. So her children could keep up with school, and the charity helped her with money to get Wi-Fi connection set up. And now, interestingly, I've discovered that that lady is involved in organising people in her building to offer help and support for others that goes on. So, you know, there's some good stuff that's happened. There were disappointments too. I don't know if you didn't go to a graduation of a grandchild or a child that was due to happen. Friends of all 3 of my children had weddings postponed. One has now cancelled hers again because she has a parent that's living in another part of the world that can't come here. We watched a wedding on Zoom. How weird is that? And Carol, a friend in Colorado, helped her 85-year-old sister in another state set up Zoom so that they could watch their own sister's funeral, each on their own. So sad. And I know you have your own sad stories too. And lastly, we all lost our routines and habits like going to church. And some polls are suggesting that church attendance actually won't go back to previous numbers. I was talking to somebody last night who drove past in a different state, yet another church in that area that was boarded up. The umbrella term to put all these feelings under is loss, and a whole lot of grief. We all have lost something, and Garrett, if you could put up that first slide. We've lost some way of life, whatever was normal, and that's happened all over the world. This is the stages of grief model, which you see goes very sequentially from da-da-da-da-da-da, and then we're done. No, it's not like that at all. The next model is more appropriate. Next slide, Garrett, thank you. That's really what it's like, right? And I think most therapists think that too now, and we know that. That's how it is. It's messy, all the feelings we've had. And I don't know if you remember that, you just about feel you've got it, that you know when you should wear your mask, and then suddenly you see somebody without a mask and somebody says, oh, you don't need to wear a mask. It's like, oh, okay, what do I do now? So the work we've gone through in our heads. And of course, there's no timeline for grief when we lose stuff. It just goes on. And we think we're sorted, and then suddenly it's back again because something reminds us. But it's not all been bad. We've lost things that we've been happy to lose, right? No commuting for some of us, a reason not to see people that maybe we'd rather not. And on the plus side, maybe we've read more, watched more films. I'm not sure if that's good. I'm running out of Netflix films I can watch. We've done jobs we've put off, and we've connected to friends in different ways. We've written more in our journal, perhaps, and we've appreciated much more what we used to do without thinking, though I find I've quickly forgotten that. One friend actually loved the restrictions in socializing, but now she's struggling with the loss of the quiet, solitary life and is overwhelmed at all the social things that she ought to go back to. So let's turn to our reading in John's Gospel, chapter 11, about Jesus and his friends who went through a whole load of emotions, I'd imagine, as we have. So Jesus' good friend is very ill, and then he dies. So I've asked Doug to read from the Street Bible, so it won't be coming up on the wall because it's actually a colloquial English version that we picked up some years ago that was written particularly to be listened to. So have a listen.
Laz and his two sisters, Mary and Martha, are great friends of Jesus. Jesus stays with them in Bethany whenever he's down near Jerusalem. He gets the news that Laz is terminally ill, but he hangs around 2 more days before leaving for Bethany. By the time that he shows, Laz has been dead 4 days. Mary and Martha are livid with Jesus, convinced that he'd been able to cure him if he'd only stopped faffing around with people that he didn't know. Jesus follows the 2 sisters to the cave where Laz is buried. They get there, and Jesus bursts into tears. A huge crowd is watching him, some touched by his grief, others more cynical, saying, well, that's all very well, but why wasn't he here when the guy was still breathing? Jesus ignores their whisperings and asks for the tombstone to be dislodged from the front of the cave. Martha objects because of the dead body's stench. Jesus insists. Didn't I tell you, trust me, and you'll see how incredible God is? A couple of heavies shoulder the tombstone to the side. Jesus looks up and says, Dad, thanks for listening. Thanks for always listening to me. I know that. You know that. So now prove it to these lot watching. Then he projects his voice across the whole audience and into the back of the cave. Laz, come on out. It echoes around the cave and comes out again. Laz, come on out. And again, quieter. Laz, come out. Before the echoes have died out completely, the ex-dead man's walking out. He's wrapped up like an Egyptian mummy, but he's hobbling. Jesus calls the shots. Unwrap him. Let the guy breathe.
So, it's funny, isn't it, when you listen to something in a different translation, it's like, there's a movie going on. So we know that whenever we look at the context, whenever we look at a Bible passage, we need to look at the context, the stories in, the customs and the mindset of that time in history. So there's 2 things that we need to know when we're looking at this story. about burial customs, which are very different to ours. The first is you have 24 hours to have a burial, and the body needs to be washed, prepared, perfumed, and then wrapped with cloth before the burial. And evidently the reason is because it's particularly a very hot climate. That's because when rigor mortis sets in, parts of the body as you move it could go different places, and you want to keep everything together. So you particularly want to tie the jaw and the hands and the legs and the feet and the fingers. So that phase has been completed by the time Jesus arrives. They've done that. And we don't know why Jesus doesn't go sooner, why he delays, because he did. We won't go there, we just don't know. The second phase of mourning is Shiva, which is for 7 days. And in the story, they're likely 4 or maybe 3 days into that process, so they're well underway. And that's a time for physical, gut-wrenching grief, wailing and crying. Neighbours bring food, but they don't attempt to comfort or offer platitudes. Very different from our culture, right? They just allow the grievers to sit with the sadness, anger, confusion, desolation. So there's 3 questions I want to try and answer in the rest of my talk. The first question, how does Jesus respond to the news about the death of his close friend? He does what you and I would do and probably have done this year. He cries. In fact, he heaves, one translation said. Other translation use the words that he goes through in this story about being angry. He was troubled. He wept. He was distressed. He was moved. And I know that for many of you, you may well be in that place now. I don't know what I'm touching as I'm speaking. Many we know are sick and coping with so much and dealing with the grief of those who have passed on. And there have been many tears, and there still are. And you're with us in our prayers. So Jesus wept, like us, at the loss of his friend. And maybe grief for many of the things he'd lost, or anticipatory grief for his own death that he seemed to be moving closer to. But N.T. Wright has said that Jesus wasn't a divine being playing at being human. He was a full-on 3D human being, full of blood, sweat, and tears. And he wasn't afraid to let the emotion deep within come out. Jesus doesn't whip over the emotional stuff, and neither should we. But in my experience, often men, dare I say, but not always, and also people of faith, often feel they can't express their feelings, as it will maybe be seen that maybe they don't trust God enough, or even that we're letting God down if we express our anger or our sadness. We've got to have that stiff upper lip, a bit like the British. I think I grew up with some of that. I remember that thing about faith drives the train, not the feelings. Feelings are way down there. And don't trust your feelings because they can lead you astray. But no. Part of being human is having emotion and weeping at times. And tears can help the healing. Tears can actually soften our hearts. One of the many chemicals, interestingly, that scientists have found in tears, and there's several chemicals in tears, is the one that softens us. It's called oxytocin. It's actually the cuddle hormone by another name. Tears can soften us and soften other people towards us so that we get what we need. If we find it hard to talk about what we feel and be in touch with our emotions, sometimes writing down what we feel can help us to be aware of what's happening inside. For tears and emotion are a normal response, just as Jesus's was, having feelings and expressing them. My second question. I found it interesting that this story isn't in any other gospel, and you'd think it would be. It's a pretty big story. So why did John include it? So we need to draw out our lens a little bit to get some clue. We do know that the book was written at the end of the 1st century, that Jesus himself had died around 60 or whatever years earlier. One idea is that John, who was writing from Ephesus, may have included it because he wanted to give a fuller picture of who Jesus was to the people he was teaching. He wasn't particularly concerned about the facts of Jesus' life on earth, but the mystery around Jesus. In fact, if we go to the first two verses, or the first few verses of John, he begins in a much more mysterious way about Jesus' arrival on earth. There's no cute manger scenes, shepherds, angels, kings. No. It says, in the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then the next verse is a bit lower, verse 14. So the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and kindness. So John is telling us that when we look at an emotional, feeling Jesus, in tears, heaving, sobbing, this is the Word, the being who gave life to everything, Creator God becoming flesh, fully God in the world. So when we think back to the story about when we see Jesus heaving and full of feelings at the tomb, this is the Word through whom the world was made, weeping like a baby at the grave of his friend. That's quite some image. And even now we know too well the pain and breaking of this earth. Climate change, terrible fires, unseasonably hot and unreasonably hot. And the pain of so many people across the world. But the Word is crying now with that pain. John therefore gives us a glimmer of what kind of God God is. This is the suffering God. Certainly not the triumphant God, or the hallmark candy-coated God that we sometimes get lured into believing. As much as I love a certain hobby store, no mention which, I grin and bear it as I'm shopping for more stuff that they're encouraging me to buy, anyway, to the soundtrack of He Rules the World with Truth and Grace. And it's like, what? No. Connie McBrayer Post spoke a few weeks ago and said, God sees you, and God, the Word, the suffering God, sees, knows your pain, your hurt, your ache, your loneliness. And we know God not only sees, but he feels that too. As Garrett said a few weeks ago, people matter to God, and so do communities. When we think of the pain in the world in our lives, or when bad things happen, and they will, we can maybe be too quick to try and give theological reasons why they do. We lived in Liberia in the Civil War, actually between the two civil wars. It was the early 90s, running a relief project with a team of 13 volunteers from almost as many countries, which was traumatic in itself, and 2 children. But our pat answers for what we were seeing had no place. We saw lives torn apart. We saw children who'd witnessed horrors that were just too awful to speak about. Forever changed. And in my work over the years as a psychologist, just witnessing awful stories, abuse, etc. The only answer I could come up with for the pain that we saw then and now is, I don't know why. And none of us do. I have no answers. I've heard many, including actually one recently this week that broke my heart, of a particular incident with a child, that God's allowed this to accomplish something better. Oh my gosh. But that's a cruel God. And the bottom line, we don't know. But there is more here in this story. What happens when Jesus does arrive? He asks Mary, the sister of Lazarus, and the others, where have you put him? And the people say, come and see. And that is the invitation that God is waiting for us to give him in our pain, in our hurt. For us to invite God and say, come and see my hurt, my pain, the deepest places, and know that God, the Word, the creator of the universe, is a God who suffers with us in it. And he can redeem it, yes. He can transform it, yes, if we take it to him and Don't therefore cut off our feelings, our humanity, become hard-hearted, that can become bitterness and cause ongoing hurt, because hurt people hurt people. I'm sure you've heard that. And they pass it on. We transmit it. But we instead come and bring that pain to God. We say, come and see, this is what's happening to me. And we know that we're not alone. He will never leave us. I gather, I haven't counted, that it's said 300 times in the Bible. You can check it out. But anyway, I'm not going to. But hey, we trust God. He is with us in this. We are not ever alone. My third and final question: why didn't Jesus leave it at just come out, Lazarus? Instead, he gave instructions to those gathered around the tomb. So the next verse, Garrett, if you could put that up from John 11. So Jesus shouted, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. And Jesus told them, "Unwrap him and let him go." Many of the people who were with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw this happen. So Jesus said, "Unwrap him and let him go." So these might sound quite straightforward and simple instructions to us. But if we think back again, that lens, drawing it out, what was going on, what was the customs at the time, both of these instructions would have been shocking things to have asked people to do living in a Jewish community. You see, there were strict laws of behavior about many aspects of life, and there were serious consequences to not keeping those rules. So if the family and friends did what Jesus told them, it would result in a person being unclean. It was forbidden to touch a grave and roll the gravestone away, and it was forbidden to touch a dead body, or maybe dead body, but it was definitely dead when they buried him, let alone unwrap those clothes when he came out. So for those gathered at the tomb, you can only imagine what they were going through and what they were thinking. What did he say? What will become of us? Can we take that risk to be unclean? Oh my goodness, I've got this party next week and I won't be able to go. And will it work? Could they trust Jesus with the unknown, with going someplace that they'd never been and had been forbidden to go? But you see, you can't get to resurrection, to something new, to the other side, without some serious undoing, some unknowing, and a falling apart. And this is what was happening. God, the Word, was asking them to go somewhere new, to let go of the old way of doing things, whatever their fears and whatever the cost. And this is exactly what I think our challenge is at this point in our COVID history. To not skip over our grief and all those emotions that we may have already forgotten we had, and the inconveniences we've endured, even at Simple Faith with our pastor Ronnie not being around. We are being challenged to reflect on those feelings, thoughts, and experiences and to make them count. Give them meaning in our journey, not to be too ready to rush on. It's a bit like the screws when you use that WD-40. Eventually that screw gets much looser, but it's like before we tighten it up again, before we readjust things, let's really readjust things. Let's tweak them. Let's make it work in a very different way than we did before. I gather my husband in Bible study this week used a metaphor, which was, we need to change the furniture around in our heads, as the old way of thinking and doing life needs to change because it doesn't fit in anymore. I think about when we moved to the beach here 3 years ago from Pennsylvania. We had actually a lovely mahogany fake Pennsylvania Dutch dresser. We had to get rid of it. It didn't fit here. No way. It's too dark, heavy. You know how it is. So perhaps there's things we need to adjust in our thinking and doing and being as a consequence of what's been revealed over these few months in our own lives, in our country, and in our world. So what's God's invitation to you today? Do you need to let go of a situation that's tying you up, making you tense in your stomach, tying you in knots? Do you need to have a crucial, not only an important, but a crucial conversation with somebody? Do you need to keep your heart soft, to let tears come, not to be hardened by all the knocks that you've gone through, to still be compassionate, to be kind and generous, regardless of colour, creed, sexual preference, or even political allegiance? Is God inviting you to rethink your priorities? What do you do with your time, your relationships, perhaps being more real instead of just nice and worrying about what people might think about you? Is there an invitation to attend to your fear of scarcity, that there won't be enough toilet rolls? No, I'm more than worried about toilet rolls, don't worry. Meaning maybe you're worried about holding on too tightly to what you have, unless that goes too. So it means we're like that, with a tight fist instead of an open hand. Maybe God's asking you to give away more money, things, or even your time. Maybe that's more precious than money. Or is God's invitation today to let go of the idea that you can control your life, saying that this year we'll go here and there, without realizing that yes, we need to make plans, but they need to be held lightly, again with that open hand. And then to be aware that, wherever we find we have to let go of something, I read this somewhere, that every little letting go as we get older, and even early on, is a preparation and practice for the big letting go when it's our time, knowing that our time is in God's hand. So I'll just read that again. Knowing that every time we let go of something, however small, every little letting go is preparation and practice for that big letting go when it's our time, knowing our time is in God's hand. So let's have the courage to look in the mirror and to do the undoing, and then begin to do the remaking, God with us, and to do the reordering that needs to be done in our lives before we move on too quickly. I've asked Garrett and the band, if you would like to come up, to sing a song. It's called Man in the Mirror. And you think, wow, she's singing with that. It's Michael Jackson. But the words are great. And then I'll come up afterwards and pray for us. So. Well done, Garrett.
So yeah, Anna asked, we're trying to think of songs that would fit this message, and I sent her a list of I can't remember what it was, 5 or 6, and she's like, let's do Man in the Mirror. Are you going to sing it? I was like, I'll attempt to. So if you know the lyrics, if you know the chorus, I invite you to sing along. It's such a beautiful song. Enjoy this.
Gonna make a change for once in my life. It's gonna feel real good. Gonna make a difference. Gonna make it right. As I turn up the color on my favorite winter coat, this wind is blowing my mind. I see the kids in the street with not enough to eat. Who am I to be blind, pretending I don't see their needs? A summer's disregard, a broken bottle top in one man's soul. They follow each other on the wind, you know, 'cause they got no place to go. That's why I take a look at yourself and make a change. Na 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 na. I've been a victim of a selfish kind of love. It's time that I realize there are some with no home, not a nickel free loan. It could really be me pretending that they're not alone. A wind will deeply scar somebody's broken heart in a washed out dream. They follow the pattern of the wind you see, 'cause they got no place to be. That's right, I'm starting with me. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. No message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself, make a change. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. No message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change.
Yeah, hats off. Let's give him another clap. Yeah, appreciate that. And I appreciate Garrett, really stretching himself and saying, no, I can do this. That's great. Not many of us would do that. So thank you. And I think the words are great. Let's start with the man in the middle, man in the mirror, and make the world a better place from what we do with our work that's inside and may be painful, but that's one thing we can do. Let's just pray. Father, as we come before you, we know that you see us, that we matter to you. You love us right where we are. You see us and know us far more than we even know ourselves. And you still say, come. I see you, I love you. And we just bring our own stuff that maybe has surfaced this morning through what we've heard. Let's just spend a few moments just quiet as we just see what comes to the surface and bring that to God. Sometimes we can't do much about what we feel. Just came across these words. May we wash and wrap love around sorrow, because sometimes that's all we can do. So Lord, instead of beating ourselves up because either we should be over this or we should have got this, just help us to wrap ourselves with love around that sorrow and that pain. And we just bring to you this morning those that we know who are struggling in our own families, with our friends, with people in our simple faith community. We just give you their lives, their pain, their hurt, knowing that you are in that with them as much as you're in that with us. And Lord, we also bring you our world as we hear the news, as we probably see far too much news. knowing that you are the suffering God in there with your heart breaking and crying too. Lord, again, we just invite you to come and see and to hold those people and those places that are hurting today. And Lord, so we pray that you would send us out today to live and to work in the power of your Spirit that ever is with us in this world, in this place that you've put us, knowing that you see us, that you care for us. And we pray that in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen.
Thank you guys for tuning in person and online. We thank you for joining us and sharing with this little journey together this morning. We are dismissing you. Have a wonderful week, everybody.
Take away, Ricky.